So happy summer, everyone. Hope you're all safe and well. And thank you all for being here and for the opportunity for me to be here as well. As you've probably expected, the beat goes on in July. With the public reopenings last month in June, this week alone, the number of daily new cases of COVID soared to new levels, actually 40% higher than they have been just in the last few days alone. We've reached 1 million new cases worldwide. This is not the second wave, this is still the first wave. This week also, William Barr and Donald Trump fired the US Attorney General, US Attorney for the Southern District of New York, who had investigated Trump's associates. And many states that have reopened are shutting down again. As a matter of fact, Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York are requiring 14-day quarantines for anyone traveling in to those states from what is they consider to be a hotspot state. This is going to be a long, hot, and perhaps stormy summer. So the lunar month began last week on the 20th, only 9 hours after the solar eclipse. Summer eclipse with a new, summer solstice with a new moon annular Cancer solar eclipse at 0 degrees of Cancer. And it's especially sensitive, good word, because 0 degrees of Cancer is clearly the most sensitive point in the chart for the moon. The eclipse solstice combination delivers a serious payload of concentrated planetary energies coming at the same time. The strongest aspect that's in this chart, from my opinion, is Saturn's exact inconjunct to the new moon. I know some astrologers consider the inconjunct to be a minor aspect. I don't. I have found in charts and in my own life that it can whack you pretty hard upside the head when you're not looking, just like a square can. And so it's a pretty intense zero degree aspect from Aquarius to Cancer. And Saturn, is the lead planet for this Capricorn stellium that we've had in the sky. Because it is the underpinning of Capricorn itself, which all these planets are in, it has really been the base note for the way that these planets are expressing their own individual archetypes. And Saturn has been leading the pack forward and backward of joining in each of these movements. Saturn, is delivering the full impact and intensity of Jupiter and Pluto and Pallas to this lunation, to this eclipse. External forces of immeasurable power, coupled with the unshakable memory of past personal choices, conspire to reawaken the commitment and necessity for truth and the search for a new direction forward. The new lunar cycle is seeded with the promise of more public outrage and dissent, suppressive authoritarian agendas, deepening concerns for safety and security, and a preponderance of both false truths and revelations. The seasons change as the wheel of fortune turns on its axis and a rare ring of fire appears across the Orient. So the first event that comes up on the calendar this year, this month, is Neptune stationing retrograde. So on the 23rd, Neptune did station, and he joined the backward focus Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto, already moving backwards in Capricorn. And it leaves just Promethean Uranus hunkered down in Taurus, who remains the sole outer planet moving direct. But he will join the others by the end of the summer. But through the summer, we're going to have all of these heavy outer gaseous giants all moving retrograde through the sky. This cosmic hip-hop, I'm calling it, intensifies through the summer, dissolving anything and everything that stands between each of us and the source of all that is. Neptune is going to add tremendous power, tremendous spiritual impact and intention to all of these transits that are occurring. And the more spiritually awakened any of us are, the more we're going to experience what's happening around us. On the 25th, Venus is going to station direct. She has been moving retrograde since the middle of May and the 13th. And there's much information that's out there on Venus Direct. I've written about it, and I've been writing forecasts about it. We're, all relationships with ourselves and with others have come under review and revision. And she will remain in her shadow through the end of July, though. Just because she is direct doesn't mean that she's cleared the field. Could still be clearing out odds and ends of relationship issues as the summer, half the summer unfolds. And there's an air grand trine at this direct station between Saturn and Juno and Venus. So it gives us the opportunity to see all of our physical and emotional desires and needs from a more intellectual and rational perspective. Venus is in Gemini. The values and priorities that have been under review now require conscious commitment and practice. We actually have to, now get down into the trenches and work on it, work with it. And the tensions in this chart between Venus and Ceres reflect the process of letting go what has been lost, reflect our adhesion to the past and the pain, the resulting pain as a result. Excuse me. On the 27th of June, Mars will ingress into his own native sign of Eris, but the day before, he's going to square the nodes. And we know that a planet squaring the nodes has a special meaning in evolutionary astrology. It indicates what Jeffrey Green called a skip step, where in the past, we have jumped or skipped back and forth between the south node and the north node, not really being able to resolve either one, being kind of caught in the middle. And it implies a situation which requires resolution. It's something which has come up and is not really going to go away until we find the solutions to what's happening here. The resolution node in a skip step is always the node it passed over last. And so if you kind of stand on the planet that is squaring the nodes and you look to your left, you will see the planet it passed over last. And in this case, it's the south node. We've been unable to resolve issues from the past, truths from the past. We need to find new ideas. What is it that we can realize that is new and will help us resolve the consequences of the choices, Mars, which is our choices, the choices that we have made. And clearly the one which rises, from my humble opinion, is the immediate reopening of all of these states and businesses only March, April, May, June, 3 months after this pandemic arose, thinking that it's more important to get the economy going again rather than get people healthy. And we're going to learn in the long run that this was not the right choice. I don't know, how we resolve it. I don't have all those answers because clearly I'm not saying the economy is not important, but our lives are more important. And it reflects a lot of what's happening in our world as well, where individual rights and property rights are in conflict, and somehow it always comes down on the side of property rights. So what this means, it asks some questions. How are the outer circumstances of your life reflecting the choices you made in the past? What we're experiencing is a result of our choices. And where have our habitual choices tripped us up? Is the desire coming from our subjective ego or from our soul ego? Is this a nodal intention? Is this coming from our north node, or is this coming from the south node of just something that we've held on to because it's habitual and familiar, rather than what we really need, the direction we really need to be going? And how are the inner experiences of your life reflecting your forward-looking intentions? What are you feeling inside, and how are you working with that in terms of the choices that you're making in your outer world? So one of the great conjunctions of 2020 that really has been the bedrock of this year occurs on June 30th. And this is the second of 3 conjunctions of Jupiter and Pluto. And it's Jupiter and Pluto, come together every 12 to 13 years in Jupiter's 12-year cycle. But they only come together in Capricorn every 250 years. But we still have to ask the question, why are this year's conjunctions so intense? So we can look at a number of things to kind of give us some clues. And the first place that I generally look is I go to the past and I look at the history, the historical events of these transits to see what occurred when these planets were in the same relationship by archetype, not just in the conjunction 12 years ago, but what was going on when they were in Capricorn. And we've had two of them in the past 500 years. The first one that I identified was in 1272. And interestingly enough, it correlated with the last of the Crusades, where the Western European countries finally realized of the futility of trying to retake the Ottoman Empire, to retake what had been lost after the loss of lives and status and all the things that occurred literally over a couple of centuries. The Crusades ended. And they didn't end in a way in which Christianity triumphed over the Muslim world at all. In 1517, we also had another religious event going on. And it was only a couple of years before this conjunction occurred that Martin Luther posted his famous 95 Theses, which really was the religious schism that created the Reformation and the beginning of Protestantism. Huge. Both of these transits are huge. The last meetup was in 1771. I think we're all pretty familiar with the events that occurred in the 1770s and the 1780s, in the decades that followed this last conjunction. We had the American and French revolutions, the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment, and all of us are quite aware of the discovery of Uranus, which was the first new planetary sighting in perhaps 10,000 years. So each of these conjunctions historically has been quite significant and had an impact that was longer lasting than just the 12 months or even the 12-year cycle of this particular conjunction. So just briefly, I want to look at the first conjunction that occurred back in April, because there's some similarities and differences in the three of these as they unfold. So in April, Jupiter, Pluto, and Pallas were all direct in Capricorn, and Saturn had just entered Aquarius, the sign it's said to co-rule. And it's an interesting thing about Saturn in Aquarius as the ruler. It was Jeffrey, and I think it was in his Uranus book, or perhaps one of his videos, he mentioned that people who have a prominent Uranus in their chart, and I think Ronald Reagan was a good example, often have, Aquarians want things to change. Uranus wants change, but there's a Promethean and an Epimethean archetype that's active here. One is forward-looking, one is backward-looking. And there are a portion of those with a very dominant Aquarian or Uranian archetype in their charts that want things to change, but they want things to go back to the way that they used to be. So some of that is what we're experiencing as Saturn moves into Aquarius. We're seeing not only the push me, pull me, where it seems like the past and the future are fighting for control of the present, because the present is being pulled in two directions. It's being pulled forward and it's being pulled backward. The other really significant thing that's been going on, it's been happening all year, and it is a partile, an exact square at this first conjunction, and no more than 1 degree away, and the rest of them is Pluto's square to Eris. And I've written about this in my 2020 Vision, a book that's on Amazon, and I've written about it in a number of articles on my website, that this particular combination of Pluto in Capricorn and Eris in Aries has not occurred in 2,700 years. It was the axial age. It was when Buddha and Pythagoras and Hesiod and the saints who we hold responsible, or who have given us the major religions of the planet, all were on the earth. It was a very important, dramatic time in our history, and I would refer you to Rick Tarnas's Rick Torres's work, because he goes into the axial age with quite detail. And it's really where a lot of this idea has come from. So this is what's coming through. We make no mistake, Eris is not a dwarf anything, just like Pluto's not a dwarf anything. She was held responsible for the end of the Trojan, for initiating the Trojan War. But more significantly, she didn't just, I've been questioned and challenged in this. I would say that Helen was really responsible for the Trojan War. But at any rate, Eris was responsible for that war, took part in it. She and Pallas as well, were the cheer team for both sides, both of the armies who fought against each other. And I see Eris as the archetype, the principle of, she brings to an end that which has found no other way to be terminated. In a personal chart, she also creates a radical perspective that can also create a whole new paradigm of something that didn't exist before. And a good example is Samuel Hahnemann, who realized homeopathy, and very, very prominent Eris in his chart, with the concept that like cures like. So also in this chart, Pallas Athena, has been, again, very important. I've written about this for a couple of years. She is moving faster than Saturn and Pluto and Jupiter. And she's up here in Capricorn. She turned retrograde. Actually, she's going to retrograde, you'll see at the end of July. Excuse me, yeah, I don't have the date in front of me, I apologize. But she because she's moving faster, she has woven her energies back and forth through the stellium 3 times. And you'll see that actually the end of July, Jupiter and Pluto are going to meet up with her again, both all in their retrograde position. So she's quite important. Demetra has suggested that her shield has been protective with COVID, and I think it's an interesting perspective. But as she moves retrograde, I wonder if perhaps that shield will not weaken. And this is perhaps what is happening and what we're beginning to experience, and we'll kind of see that in the next chart. The molten shape of a brave new world is being extruded by Jupiter and Pluto, but it's a world in which we're also learning to be brave. So on the 30th, they come together the second time, and this is an interesting second pass. Very often the outer planets will pass 3 times, 5 times, even 7 times, because they're so slow moving, and the outer planets have wide elliptical orbits. But generally, in the second conjunction of outer planets, only one of them is retrograde. Here we have both of them retrograde, which really doubles the intensity of this conjunction that's coming up. And again, they both are in a partile square to Eris. But this time, Saturn is also retrograde, and he's moving in unison with Pallas, Jupiter, and Pluto. The question that comes up is how can I generate and sustain real-time personal growth with this Eris square in Aries? Eris is clearly working to evolve all of us, whether we want to go or not. We're going to go kicking and screaming, or we're going to go proactively. But either way, we're going over that wall. And with Pluto, and Eris combined, we can see that the pressures in our world, seem insurmountable. People are just, really besides themselves with the intensity and the density of the events that are unfolding day by day. We're going to see the exercise of power and authority. We are seeing the exercise of power and authority. Barr and Trump trying to take out the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York is a total. He had total independent administration. It's the most powerful U.S. attorney in the country that they went after. And it's a good example of what we're going to begin to see. I have, serious questions about, the legality of a lot of these things that will come from the White House, even from the Senate, from the Department of Justice. over the next 6 to 12 months in terms of what they're, what they're going to try and get away with. And we're going to see non-compromised positions on both sides of the aisle. And attentions are going to be brought abruptly to health issues and self-care issues. We see the sun down here sandwiched in between Hygeia and Vesta. There's no question that our self-actualization process, the way that we're going to go forward in terms of our own self-development, is going to clearly be accentuated and focused on our health and self-care. So the last conjunction is going to occur on November 12th. I'm going to kind of leave this, to discuss this when November comes up, but this is going to be, just at election time. It's going to be quite an intense event. At the next conjunction, which is the last, Jupiter, Pluto, Pallas, and Saturn are all going to be direct again in Capricorn. And Jupiter and Pluto will still square Eris. And this is going to be under a Scorpio moon and a Scorpio sun and a Libra moon. So it's going to be interesting, folks. It's going to be interesting to watch and see how this unfolds. So some uncomfortable history. In the weeks leading up to the conjunction, the US Senate acquitted Donald Trump on all counts of impeachment. Wall Street crashed over 1,100 points. The World Health Organization declared coronavirus a pandemic, and the entire planet began to go on lockdown. And in the weeks following, the number of deaths from COVID passed 100,000 globally, and the number of cases worldwide passed the 2 million mark. And as I said, only in the last couple of weeks, we've already had another million. So, this is our unfortunate American history. On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was murdered by a Minneapolis police officer, igniting protests, looting, and as reported in the New York Times, tens of thousands of people swarmed the streets to express their outrage. This militarized police attitude began to reveal itself in 2012 with the murder of Eric Garner. But then we had Michael Brown, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Megan Hockaday, Deborah Danner, Alton Sterling, Philandro Castile, Gregorio Mack, and Kenneth Ross Jr. Racism did not begin in 2012, guys, or in Ferguson. It began 400 years ago, or maybe 6,000 years ago. It's part of our colonial heritage. In 1776, there were over 500,000 Negro slaves in the American colonies. And many of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were slave owners, including George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. This is all inconvenient history about our country that, nobody really talks about. The history books have been rewritten, about our great, democracy and our great republic. But the truth is that great democracy only lasted for about 50 years. And it's really been mostly in our lifetimes. So we don't really have any personal direct experience of what happened before. And we're perhaps unprepared for what could be coming after. So on June 30th, Mercury will make his inferior conjunction to the sun as he passes between the Earth and sun. He's in his Promethean cycle, which means he'll rise before the sun as the morning star in the morning. Memories will become sanctuaries and places of refuge, and we can fall into the emotional craters in our lives. On the 1st of July, Saturn retrogrades back into native Capricorn until December 17th. As I said, he's been leading the pack of this great conjunction as they move in unison, forward and backward and forward again, driving slowly and steadily towards their Aquarian waypoint. Pallas Athena weaving her strategic tapestry all around them, while Eris beats her drum. Next year, we're going to see Jupiter and Saturn, both in Aquarius. Things will change in 2021 big time, especially since both of them are going to be squaring Uranus. On July 2nd, Pluto retrograde conjoins Pallas retrograde, and then on the 3rd, Jupiter conjoins Pallas retrograde. So we're going to see, more combining of all these energies. They're really blending. Pallas shows us the big picture. She shows us the whole enchilada, if you would, so we can understand how the little pieces fit together. She's a strategist. She's also the woman in a man's world. And she represents gender equality. So we're going to see events that swirl around all of these themes as this year unfolds, and as the next couple of years unfold. And I just want to reference that these beautiful glyphs were created by Bradley in Oregon. I love them. So the last of the eclipses occurs on the 4th or 5th of July, depending on where you are on the planet. It occurs around midnight. It's going to be another penumbral Capricorn lunar eclipse. Penumbral is an eclipse where only a portion of the Earth's shadow falls across the moon. And the full moon for is at 14 degrees of Capricorn. It's not quite at 15, but it's still a pretty stiff Capricorn degree, right at the center of that archetype, really kind of holding the space of Capricorn very, very squarely. All of the above described outer planet influences are in full play at this conjunction. As the moon applies to the conjunction of Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, and Pallas. And again, it's going to deliver all of these planetary intensities into our own direct emotional experience. The moon is our emotional body. The moon and Pluto are the emotional experiences that generate our evolution. They generate the experiences and the events and circumstances and relationships in our lives that pull us forward. Whether we go proactively or we go reactively, we go in that direction ultimately. As a result of that inner emotional knowledge. We can hear something, somebody can tell us something intellectually, we can read it in a book, but until we experience it emotionally, we don't get it, we don't learn it. And the eclipse is within 2 minutes, not 2 degrees, but 2 minutes of asteroid Vesta, emphasizing the need for personal authenticity and the awareness of the absence of personal authenticity. Both of those themes, I think, are rocking our world. People are acting out, according to whatever they feel is right or wrong, and people are just doing what they want to do, whether it's right or wrong. Saturn executes a partile inconjunct to the lunar north node here. So we have another inconjunct from Saturn, uncomfortably contorting our forward-looking gaze. The north node is our forward-looking intention. It's where we're intending to go. With Saturn torquing it, kind of tweaking it, it's creating a crisis and causing us to really take a look at where it is we're going. What is it we're intending, and how are we proactively addressing that intention? The full moon's a release point. We know that it's the fullest elongation between sun and moon. And at that full moon, things happen. It's when things manifest. Relationships show up, people show up, circumstances show up. So it's why the full moons and the lunar eclipse can have the impact that it does. And Mercury's presence with the Cancer sign intends narratives, and the square to Mars and Chiron reflect impending choices about our medical path forward, and the security and sanctity of the individual freedom versus what we consider to be collective imperatives. And both of those are important. We get up every morning and we say a little prayer, that what we do will be good for, everyone everywhere, for all beings everywhere. But we also have to, be concerned with what we need, that may be in contrast to what the collective is asking us to do. And we have to remember with both of these eclipses, the one that happened last week and the one that's going to happen next week, 2 weeks, is that just because nothing happened at an eclipse or at another major planetary event does not mean that something is not beginning to unfold that we will see manifest over the next 3 to 6 months or even longer. So on the 12th of July, we have Chiron stationing retrograde. And I read this quote from Eckhart Tolle, and I realized that I could not address this aspect as completely and as perfectly as he did. Humanity as a whole has already gone through unimaginable suffering mostly self-inflicted, the culmination of which was the 20th century with its unspeakable horrors. This collective suffering has brought upon a readiness in many human beings for the evolutionary leap that is spiritual awakening. There's nothing I could add to that, and there's nothing it would take away. This is what the core theme of what the space we're moving through. And Eris herself is going to station retrograde. I think that it's going to intensify her influence and her activities, on the planet. Eris's retrogrades are quite interesting. She has a 500-year orbit, and she spends 120 years of that 500 years, 120-year portion of it in a single sign of Aries. That's 1/5 of the time in 1/12 of the signs. So, if you do a little math, you realize that 120 degrees, there are 60 degrees in each sign. She retrogrades once a year, which means that she's going to retrograde over every single point in Aries before she finishes this transit. And we know that a retrograde point is kind of like holding a magnifying glass up to the sun and having that point of solar light burn down, into a single spot. Well, that's what Eris is going to do as she moves through Eris. And she's at just about at 25 degrees. So anybody with anything in a cardinal sign, I'd say between 20 and 30 degrees of cardinal sign could very easily feel this square very strongly. And again, it's going to have very long-term effects. She has forced the emergence of our modern world. She's been in Aries since 1927. And in her 129-year journey through the sign this time. And she met Eris 2 years later in 29, met up with Eris, first conjunction. He's an 84-year cycle. She's here 129 years, which means Eris and Uranus are going to come together twice. So the first occurrence brought the stock market crash and the Great Depression. We then had the Second World War. In 2016, actually in 2015, Uranus and Eris came back together again. And in 2016, she presented us with Donald Trump. And now these great conjunctions with Eris in square have brought us COVID in at least 12 different mutations, which is why it's so difficult to find a vaccine. Now, not that I'm so sure that a vaccine is really the answer, because from what I'm hearing locally from people who have been tested and were positive, were told to just go home and quarantine themselves, that it's a very conservative protocol where we really have the ability to heal this ourselves. There really is no need for a vaccine, assuming that we are in relatively decent shape, we're in good health. We have to remember that Eris has brought the end to the Greek classical age. What in our modern culture has also reached the point where it must end, seemingly at all costs. So these are important dates to watch. I've listed them all here for you. You can jot them down. These are the dates of all the different events and when they will occur. This will also be posted on my website as well as part of this month's transit report. So you'll be able to come back to it and see this if you need it. So here are my horoscopes for the month for each sign. And you can read these horoscopes, apply these horoscopes, not just for your sun sign, but also your rising and moon sign as well. So Aries, try to keep it all on a slow simmer right now if you can. It's okay to feel the heat, but keep the flames under control. Find a cool place to cool down. Be your tribe. Have a lemonade or a margarita if that's your choice. Let your emotions have room, but just watch them go by and then just let them go. Taurus, what new ideas rock in your world? Which is more amazing? The idea itself, or the fact that you never realized it before? Yes, it was so obvious, but the most important truths generally are, right? We just have to shake our heads, be grateful we realized it, and go forward with that new piece. Perhaps there are other undiscovered pieces of the puzzle out there as well. Journey out from your fortress this month and find them. Gemini, are you finally learning through your heart and not from your head what is important? Sorry it took all this time to get there, but let's be grateful for how much we have learned. Keep searching for the one word or sentence or idea that can answer all the questions that we have about ourselves and the world around us. Please be sure to publish it profusely when you find it. Cancer. It's quite understandable if life feels like it is overflowing its banks right now. On one hand, you have never felt quite so much of yourself, but it has been quite a challenge to release the past. Stay committed to who you are becoming. Be your own best nurturer. If there is the power that you have projected onto others, please take it back for yourself. Leo, work your magic behind the scenes. Send spells from your heart. Project a reflection of the future. Don't worry about how much it might be shimmering right now. Fill it with love, empathy, and goodwill for all beings everywhere. Virgo, have you found your guild, Artisan Virgo? In a community, we don't just have strength in numbers, but also in knowledge and wisdom. How do we find or perhaps create the self-organizing society of like-minded individuals we belong to? When are all of the organized routines and routine organizations that are in disarray? When are all the organized routines and routine organizations are in disarray, new opportunities arise. Watch for them. Libra, have your work circumstances changed recently? Could it be because how you see yourself, who you want to become has changed? Who we are in the outer world is the reflection of who we are in our inner world. When the inner world changes, our outer world will reflect the change. Focus on who you want to become. Let go of who you have been. Scorpio, it happens to be a fundamental truth that knowledge is power. Mass movements have been spawned by a single idea. The greatest knowledge we can gain is self-knowledge, which in turn leads to the greatest degree of self-empowerment. Study your own nature by observing what you recognize in others as good and bad. Use that balance sheet as your self-study. Sag, a crisis is perhaps the highest form of adventure. We must identify and use all of our resources to survive the ordeal. Seize this ongoing crisis, both the collective experience and your personal experience, as the chance to intentionally play out your self-written drama. Find your cast of characters. Create your mise-en-scène. Capricorn, did someone tell you as a child that the world was big and you were small? Guess what? It's just the opposite. What you project outward is really what is going on inside you. The power and authority that others use to suppress your self-expression are your own. Recognize your inherent strength of character and initiative. Aquarius, though we often use the term tribe and family as synonyms, however, that is not always the case. Sometimes as our life unfolds, we find a tribe that we belong to that is separate from our born family. Balancing our participation in both is sometimes challenging. Know where you came from, but stay focused on where you are going. Pisces, sometimes the boundary between self and non-self is elusive. Dreams, emotions, thoughts that seem to come to us of their own volition. What is real? What is illusory? Run each dream, emotion, and thought through the filter of your own heart, and you will know what is true and what is not. So these monthly transits are all done at the new moon every month on my website and on Facebook. I do daily transits as well, but I also put up on Facebook single, whatever the single transits are for the day, assuming there is one. There isn't something every day. And this is where you can reach me for your own reading to find out how these transits are affecting you personally. And I thank you all so much for being here. I think we have some time. I can open the floor for questions if there are any.
Daniel, there are no questions from Facebook and none from here either. So we can wind down this meeting.
Okay.
Thank you so much, and looking forward to catching you next month. It was excellent.
Yes.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.